All right, folks, in today's video, we're gonna go through the entire process, step by step, of making an Osage self-bow. Now, if you're new to bow building, I'm gonna try to explain every step of the process and why I do things the way that I do. And if you've been building bows for a little while, maybe you can pick up some new tips and tricks that might help speed up your bow building. Now, we're gonna be working with Osage orange today, and I've got a stave here that has probably been cut for 7 or 8 years. If you look at this thing, it's anything but straight. So we're gonna have to address that with a heat gun. But first thing we're gonna do is get this thing down to one annual, yearly, unbroken growth ring, one unbroken annual growth ring. Yes, that's what I'm trying to say. Along the back of the bow. And then I'll show you how to lay this thing out and make a bow. Let's get started. So before we get started on this, I just want to mention that we are using a very simple toolkit today. Primarily, we're going to be using a draw knife. We're going to throw some other tools in there as we need. We're going to use a compass, a pair of calipers, and a few other just odds and ends. But primarily, this right here is what we're going to be using. I've already got all the sapwood off this stave, so we're just going to clean this ring up and get down to the ring below it, so that I know that I've got an unbroken ring all the way across the back of this thing. Now, this is a process that's fairly unique to Osage. There's a lot of other bow woods out there that you don't have to do this with. But you can see, I'm not sure if you can pick that up or not, but there's a growth ring exposed all the way across the back. Then I've got one above it here, and everything above this one has to come off. So Osage is what's known as a ring porous hardwood, as opposed to a diffuse porous hardwood. Ring porous hardwoods have very defined rings, very easily discernible rings. And in Osage, there'll be something called late wood, which is a very hard, dense part of the wood, and early wood. Early wood in Osage is kind of crunchy, and it just doesn't have much substance to it. But the good thing is that these rings of late wood are separated by these rings of early wood. And so when we're chasing a ring or trying to expose one ring along the back of this thing, we can use our draw knife more like a wedge, and we can wedge in those early wood layers to peel off the harder, denser late wood rings. Now you'll notice when I'm coming up to these knots, I'm not just ripping straight across them. I'm actually taking the back of my knife and tilting it down a little bit, and that changes the bevel, or changes the angle of the bevel relative to the wood, and it causes that blade to ride up those knots so that you don't tear the top off of them and violate that ring. I'm also kind of going around them. So I've got my ring all the way up to these knots. Now I'm just going to go around the sides of it so that I don't go across the top and rip that top off and violate that ring. Come to the back of it. Get back down to our ring that we're following. I'll just work back towards that knot from the other side. So now we've got one ring exposed all the way to right here. So we'll just turn this thing around and work from there back. So when you shoot a bow, the back is under tension. It's trying to pull apart. So that's why it's important to have one unbroken ring across the back of this thing. So you don't, basically, so you don't have a fault line where it can come apart. So what we're gonna do now is take our draw knife. We're gonna clean up this side so it's nice and smooth. And then I'm gonna set a compass and we're gonna draw a parallel line and we'll get this thing to the same width all the way up and down it. We'll take a compass and set it to about like that. It's about 1 1/4 inches, maybe. So there's a couple of different ways that you can lay these bows out depending on the stave that you're working with. And the reason that I like to do it like this, by cleaning up one side and then scribing a parallel line, is because it follows the grain perfectly. If you have a stave that does like this one, it's got a big C curve in it, or if you've got a bunch of snaky grain, doing it like this will follow that grain anywhere it goes, rather than like using a straight edge and cutting across the grain. So this stave is 63.5 inches long. So we're just going to measure and put a mark right here in the center, 31 3/4. And then I'll measure up 2 inches and down 2 inches for our handle section. We're going to make this a symmetrical design. So at this point, there's a couple of different ways you could go. You could go ahead and draw the back profile on here and thin out these limbs towards the nocks, but I find it easier if you get rid of a bunch of this bulk material on the belly side here. And so what we'll end up doing is sawing a couple of slots down in here, and we're gonna pop off, we're gonna use a chisel and a hammer to pop off big segments of this wood down here. Now, doing it this way is a little bit risky if you don't get your saw cuts in the right spot. And the trick is to basically, you don't want to go more than about half of the bulk of the stave. I say bulk rather than depth, because if you have a stage that is wedge shaped or pie piece shaped, you can go more than halfway down, because you have just as much bulk down here in the widest part as you do in that narrow tapered out part of the pie section. This stave is pretty uniform from front to back, so I'll probably end up going with my saw cut, I'll go just a little bit beyond half the depth of this, and then I'll stick my hammer or stick my chisel in there and pop off these pieces. When I uploaded some of my first bow building videos, probably 15 years ago, I would just, at this point, I would just take a draw knife and start hogging off material. And you can do it that way, but it's a lot of work and takes a lot of extra time. The reason that these saw cuts are so important, the depth of these saw cuts is so important, is because if you go too deep, the split tends to run towards the thinner part. So if you go too deep, the split will run down into where your limb is going to be. And if you go too shallow, it tends to run back up this way. So you'll start deep down here and you'll end up not really taking out much down here. This one, I'm going to go a little deeper on that one. Now, when I'm prying on this, I'm going to watch this split just to make sure that it's not going to dive down into the limb. Yep, perfect. So the other good thing about doing it this way is now you have two little miniature sized billets, and you could put these together and make a kid's bow no problem at all. So now I'm just going to clean this thing up a little bit more, and we'll go ahead and draw our back profile on here, and then we'll start making this thing look like a bow. All right, so we're at the point where we can start drawing our tip tapers on there so that we can taper this thing out towards the nocks. Now, you look at this thing and it's got a big C curve through it, and we're eventually gonna have to straighten that out. And so what I'm gonna do when I draw these tips on there, I'm gonna kind of cheat them to the outside of this bend a little bit to try to take some of that bend out while we're cutting in the nocks. And then we'll address the rest of it with a heat gun. We'll do the same thing on the other side. So we're going to reset our compass to, I don't know, something about like that. We can draw our side profiles on here for our limbs, plural. If you have a like a felt tip Sharpie, like one of those fine felt tip Sharpies, that actually works really well for this. But I don't have one, so I'm using a pencil. Now these lines aren't perfect, and they don't have to be. We're just looking for kind of a rough guide for right now. It's hard to draw a perfect line when your wood's kind of not real smooth like this, so we're going to knock off the bulk of this, clean up the side so everything's smooth, and then I'll go back and draw those lines again. All right, so I've got everything cleaned up. I redrew my lines on there. Now, those lines are, not sure what the gap is. We'll just measure here and see. It's about, oh, I don't know, 14 millimeters or something like that. So what I'm gonna do next is take my chisel and I'm gonna work these fades out. You could do this with a rasp, you could do it with a round on a belt sander, tabletop belt sander. You could even do it with a draw knife. if you like extra work, but easiest way I've found is with a chisel. When I'm going down to these lines, I'm not trying to flatten this thing all the way across from one line to the other. If you do that, it's easy to focus on this line and lose track of this line. You'll end up with one that's maybe dips down below your line, and that you really want to avoid. And so what I'm doing is I'm tilting my draw knife up just a little bit so that I can run this line on down, I can come back, run this line down, and I end up with a little peak in the middle. The peak doesn't have to be very pronounced, but it's helpful if you leave one there. Once we get done bringing this on down to the line, then we can come back with our draw knife, use it as a scraper, and kind of work that peak down through the tillering process. All right, so we've got this thing thinned out enough that it's starting to bend, or it would bend if I could actually put pressure on it without it twisting in my hands, but it's so crooked that I can't put that pressure on there. It just wants to spin. So at this point, we need to do something to straighten this thing out, and that means breaking out the heat gun. All right, so what I've done is just took a couple of 2x4s, sawed a few slots in there so that my limbs will fit in there. And this is gonna keep the bow from rocking as I put pressure on here and straighten this limb out. So we'll start applying a little bit of heat right here, heat it up. I'll start putting some pressure on the clamp, and we're just gonna take this bow and push it down and straighten this limb out. So when I'm heating this wood, I'm focusing the heat on the belly side of the bow. And the reason I'm doing that is because if we put too much heat on the back is, when the bow is drawn and shot, the back is under tension, and putting too much heat on the back can actually reduce its ability to withstand that tension. It makes it a little bit more brittle. On the belly side, the belly doesn't have to withstand tension, only compression, and so it doesn't really matter. And actually heat on the belly side can help to harden it and make it more resistant to compression and make for a little bit quicker shooting bow. But what we're doing right now is just trying to heat this up just enough to get this thing to bend and straighten this limb out. All right, so this is cooled enough. Hopefully it'll stay. Sometimes you gotta do it multiple times if you don't get it on the first pass. Yep. So we'll heat this other limb. Look at that. Nice and straight. So I had to go through, I think I heated one limb, heated the other limb, and then had to go back and do one more pass on the other limb. But it came out pretty doggone straight. And let's give it a little press here. Fairly even. This limb here feels a little bit stiffer. So we'll start just by taking wood off of that one. See if we can make it match the other one. And see if we can't turn this thing into a bow. kind of round these sharp edges off. You know, when you're doing this, you're really not removing that much wood, but it really does make a big difference in the way the wood moves and bends. All right, so this thing's starting to look like a bow, starting to bend like a bow. So the next thing we're gonna do is take a pair of just regular old calipers. I've got a little lock knob on here, and we're gonna look for thin spots. A bow of this design is gonna taper, ideally, from the handle section all the way down to the tip. Now there's other bow designs that get fatter down here at the tips. That's not what we're after. We're after a nice smooth taper. And so sometimes when you're scraping and tillering a bow, you can end up with thin spots in the mid limb or just anywhere along the limb. And having a pair of calipers like this can help you identify those things. So what I'm gonna do is just come along here, slide these calipers along, and you can watch the scale on the calipers. And if it gets fatter, or if it grows, you know you've got a little bit of a thick spot. And of course, if it dips down, you'll know you have a little bit of a thin spot. So I've got a little bit of a thin spot right here. I'm gonna lock my calipers down, and then I'm gonna take from here on out and just look for the next spot that I can slide these calipers down, which is right there. So now I know that between there and wherever I got those calipers on, where was it? Right here, I know that I've got a thick spot right in there. So I'll take a little bit of wood off here, slide the calipers on there, and take wood off until I can take those calipers and slide them all the way down. Now when you're doing this, keep in mind that if there's a knot there, wherever it gets fatter, don't worry about that. It's gonna, your limb's gonna be a little bit thicker if there's any knots in that particular area, and that's okay. Now, right in this area, just watching the scale, I can tell that I'm dropping thickness really quickly, just like right in here. So I'm gonna blend that thin spot right on up into the rest of the limb here. I think we're ready to cut some nocks into this thing. All right, so what we're gonna use to cut the nocks into this thing is a little tile saw that will fit onto a hacksaw like this. I really like these things because you can get super accurate and make some really nice nocks with them. Yeah, that's what happens when your tile saw sits around and rusts. Dang it. Ah. So we have got the nocks cut into this thing. We're gonna see if we can get a short string on it. If you look back at some of my older, well, pretty much all of my bow building videos, you see me using a tillering string, which is just a long string that kind of drapes. And really, you know, when I'm building bows myself, I very rarely use a tillering string anymore. I just go straight to a short string. I think part of that is because I've built so many of them that I feel comfortable getting them closer to a final finished bow without ever even bending them than I, you know, did, or that I do when I'm trying to teach someone. So there you go. First string in, short string. You can see this bend, or this limb is bending just a little bit more. So you need to take a little bit off of this one, and that should straighten her out. We'll get it kind of even, and then we'll go put it on the tillering rack. Oh, that looks much better. All right, let's go put it on the tillering rack. All right, so just pulling on the bow a little bit like that, you can see that most of the bend is kind of in this interior portion here. So we're just going to take a little bit of wood in the stiff areas. We're going to remove some of that right out here, round these limbs over a little bit. We'll come put it back on here and see what we did. The limbs were fairly even side to side, so we'll just take off, you know, I'll probably take off maybe 10 scrapes off this side, 10 scrapes off that side, and just try to keep things even. Got a little bit of a thin spot right here that I can just see with my eye, so I'm avoiding that. Looks like still a little stiff, kind of right out in here. So we're just going to repeat that process. I'm going to take it back to the bench over there. We'll take a little bit out of this, kind of this section right here on both limbs and bring it back, but it's starting to round out. So it still looks just a little bit stiff towards the outside of the limb, especially on this limb. But I think that's primarily due to this limb's got a little bit of a back set to it. Now I don't have a bow scale down here, so we're just gonna have to guesstimate on the weight on this thing. But that was drawn all the way to 28 inches. Just see what the weight feels like. It's still a little heavy. It's probably, if I had to guess, I'm gonna say it's probably 65 at 29 inches. So probably around 62-ish at 28. Now, as you shoot these bows in, as you just kind of break them in, they're gonna drop a little bit of weight. So keep that in mind when you're building your bows. You want them, when you want to finish them, a little bit heavy because they're gonna drop into whatever weight you want. With this one, I still want to take a little bit of wood out of these outer limbs, round them out a little bit, and that's going to drop the weight down, but I also want to add a little bit of reflex to the tips. I don't want to make a full recurve out of it. I just want to flip these tips over just a little bit, and that's going to add the weight up. And so we're going to take a little bit more wood out of right here, which is going to drop the weight back down a little bit. We're going to add the reflex. That's going to bring it back up. And then we'll have to bring it back out here, see what it looks like, draw it a few times, see what it feels like. So the thing you got to keep in mind when you're tillering these things is the thinner these limbs get, the more each scrape counts for, or the more impact it's going to have on the weight of the bow, how the limb bends, and all of that stuff. So when you first start this, you can be really aggressive with your scraping. You can take off a lot of real heavy scrapes and maybe not change it all that much. But as you sneak in on that final tiller, just a few scrapes can make a big difference. And so on this, you know, I might take off 5 or 6 you know, relatively light scrapes and just go back and see what it looks like on the tillering rack. You know, once you take that wood off, you ain't putting it back on. All right, we are getting very, very close here. Got the reflex in the limb tips. Let's string this thing up, put it on the rack and see what it looks like. Looks fairly even. I think we might have a little bit more gap here than here, but let's throw it up here and see what it looks like. I'd say that's probably about 65 at 29, which is where I want it because it's going to drop a few pounds as it ages and shoots in. So now we need to decide which limb is going to be the top. And what I'm looking for is just the gap. It looks like we may have a little bit more of a gap here than here, but I'll put a measuring tape on there and measure it. So I've turned the bow around now, so this is the limb that was over here. Just still looks really stiff right in here to me. So when I put this bow up on the rack and I pull it down, the limb that was just on the left-hand side, it looks like the outer part of that limb is just really stiff. But that's one of the things that you really have to kind of watch for with these natural staves, is that this limb, if you look down it, this limb has actually got a little bit of backset or reflex right in this portion. And so if I were to take enough wood off to make this round out and kind of match the flow of the rest of the limb, it would actually have to bend more than the rest of the limb, because it would have to overcome this reflex and then bend beyond it. And so when you're tillering these things, you have to take those natural undulations of the stave into account. And it might not look perfect on the tillering rack, but you're just trying to kind of split the difference, I guess, between what looks right, having a nice bend across the entire bow, and not taking too much off of areas that are having to overcome things like this. And the opposite goes for areas that have deflex, that bend towards the belly of the bow. If you have a natural bend towards the belly of the bow, you put it up here and it's going to make it look like it's bending more than it actually is. Just some things to think about. So, even though that looks a little bit stiff, I'm going to leave it just like it is, because I think it's doing just as much work as the rest of the limb, and it's just having to overcome this whoop-de-doo that's in the bow limb. All right, so I'm just going to measure the tiller here. So we've got just over 7 1/8, and we've got 7 1/4 here. So we've got a little more bend on this side. So that's perfect. That's the limb that I wanted to be the top. So we'll go ahead and mark out our shelf, cut our shelf in there, and we'll be ready to go fling some arrows. So this bow is pretty much done. If you wanted to, you could leave it just like this. You could just sand it off, finish it off, put a handle wrap on there if you want, and you can go shoot arrows and just shoot off of your knuckle. That's perfectly fine. There's a lot of guys that shoot self bows that way. Most self bows are actually shot that way. But I like to cut a shelf into my bow, and so we just went ahead and put a mark on there where the shelf is gonna go. We'll go ahead, cut down through there. We'll use our chisel to get down and take the remaining wood out, shape it up a little bit. It should be done. Now, I would not normally cut a shelf in with a Sawzall, but Sawzall is what I have, so that's what we're using. All right. We'll cut that shelf in part way and put an arrow on there just to make sure it's going to line up well, and that actually looks like it's lining up pretty well. All right, folks, so it's getting on towards the evening, and we've been at this for a little bit, so we're gonna just kind of hang it up today, take a break, come back tomorrow. We're gonna throw some Velcro on this shelf and strike plate right there, and fling a few arrows and see how this thing shoots. But I'm happy with the way it's turned out. It's not taking any set, hardly at all, and it feels, when I draw it, it feels really nice. So I suspect that it's really gonna fling some. that's really gonna fling, well, them arrow, you know what I mean? I'm tired. And we're back. So what we're gonna do today is go ahead and just burn these nocks in, just open them up a little bit because that tile saw is really thin and the string will barely fit in there. Plus I just like the way it looks with those burned in nocks like that. So this is just a temporary thing, doesn't have to be pretty. I'm gonna end up taking this off. This thing's quiet. Helps when you hold on to the bow. So this thing is shooting really, really nice. It's definitely got some zip. I don't have a chronograph or anything down here. I don't even know what the bow weighs. I'm guessing, I don't know, low 60s. And it's probably shooting, I'm gonna guess maybe 175 feet per second with these heavy grain arrows. These are probably 640 grain arrows. So, you know, anything over 170 with a heavy arrow like that is, for a self-bow, pretty doggone good. But it's doesn't have any hand shock. It's quick, quiet. I like it. I'm grouping a little bit to the left with these arrows. So, may have to do some adjustment with maybe find a different spine that'll bring that group to the right a little bit. Yeah, so shooting the same exact spot every single time. I'm only about 10 yards, but I've got my group is, I don't know, they're all touching. I mean, they're like side by side. So this is where I'm aiming and hitting just a little bit left, but you can see how tight they are together. But that's something that can be corrected with probably just maybe even something as simple as changing tip weights. But anyway, I'm not going to get into tuning these things. I've got a whole playlist on shooting and tuning these things. If you want to know more about that, you can check it out. So, like the way the bow shoots, we're going to go ahead and finish this thing off, sand it down, make it look pretty, put some sealer on there, and we'll be done with this thing. This is the worst part about building a bow. I hate sanding. So I've been using this clear coat from Rust-Oleum, but I usually use the flat or the matte finish. Halls didn't have any, so we're using semi-gloss today. We'll have to knock the sheen down with some steel wool.